the Ramban is going to quote sugya after sugya with his great erudite scholarship in Shas to prove how many different so-called mitzvos are really up in the air and subject to debate and contention. One case after the other, in which, according to one Tana, there is a mitzvah, and according to another Tana, it's not a mitzvah, it's a reshus, or maybe it's not even dorais at all. And how do you come up with the number 613? Are we going to say that every single Tana who took an opinion, took an approach, and expressed a view on a particular mitzvah, he's now bound? He's like incarcerated in a jail. And we're going to have to raise the objection, well, if you added a mitzvah here, you're going to have to subtract a mitzvah there in order to arrive at Taryag. And if you subtracted a mitzvah here, you're going to have to add another mitzvah to its place. I mean, it's a very difficult undertaking. So we're now at the point where we're sort of halfway through the Ramban's proof that there are mitzvos that are under contention with the machlokas tanoim, and the Ramban is going to continue to show us over and over again how this phenomenon repeats itself in so many different ways and in so many different areas of halacha. In the text of the Ramban, we got up to V'hinei Arav Atzmo Zal Mana Chametz Mishesh Shos Ulamala. יש לנו שיעור עכשיו פה. Okay. Oh. This system is for anybody who comes in? Oh, I didn't know that. I thought this was part of your cola. Okay. All right. I'll try to do my best to concentrate here. I guess my excitement about coming here to Beit Midrash Tzurit is not as justified as I thought it was. Okay. Hine Arav Atzmo Zal. I think Avon is calling here. Okay. Mana Chametz Mishesh Shos Ulamala La Bifnei Atzmo. The Ramban is now referring to a sugya in Masechta Pesachim Adaf Chav Ches. And the Gemara raises the question of eating chametz on Erev Pesach after the end of the 6th hour, beginning of the 7th hour, which means midday. And the Gemara quotes a machlokes between two great Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda on the one hand and Rabbi Shimon on the other. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that the Torah prohibits the eating of chametz on Erev Pesach from noon and on the 14th of Nisan as a lav d'oraisa. And he bases himself on a pasuk, which we'll see in just a minute. The pasuk seems to indicate that from the time of Shchitas HaPesach, which is the 14th of Nisan midday, we are enjoined from eating chametz. And that's a lav d'oraisa. Rabbi Shimon denies it and holds that the Torah does not prohibit eating chametz except during the 7 days of Pesach. We'll soon see that even Reb Shimon agrees that you're not allowed to have chametz in your possession from the time of Shchitas HaPesach, which is midday on the 14th on the Erev Pesach. So it's an interesting kind of thing. You're going to have to destroy your chametz, but yet the Torah doesn't prohibit you from eating the chametz. So hold on to that point. But in any event, that's the shita of Shimon. So again, just to summarize, whereas Rabbi Yehuda has a lav d'oraisa, which enjoins us from eating chametz at the time of the Shchitas HaPesach on Erev Pesach, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon denies it. And Rabbi Shimon doesn't have a lav and an isa d'oraisa to eat chametz on Erev Pesach. The Rambam paskins like Rabbi Yehuda. And the Rambam counts in the minyan mitzvahs like Rabbi Yehuda, following in his footsteps, a lav d'oraisa that enjoins us from eating chametz on Erev Pesach at Chatzos. And the Ramban is now pointing out that the Rambam is in error because we're going to paskin like Reb Shimon. And Reb Shimon denies the lav d'oraisa of eating chametz on Erev Pesach. Now, where can we find this discussion in more great detail? In my edition, I don't know if it's the same in your edition, it says, Harav Atzmo Zal Mana Lo Taseh Kuf Tzadi Tes, 199. Chametz Mishei Shos Lamala Lav Bifnei Atzmo Vehu Kedivrei Rabbi Yehuda Ula Rabbi Shimon Ein Bo Lav Klal. Kemoshe Mefurish Beperik Al Shach of Ches Amid Beis. So what I'm going to do now, with your permission, I want to show you the Rambam on Kuf Tzadi Tet, which is in the Minyan Al-Lavim, and the comments of the Ramban on Kuf Tzadi Tes. The Rambam writes, HaMitzvah Kuf Tzadi Tes, Hi Sheziranu Milechol Chametz Achar Chatzos Yom Arbasa B'Nisan. V'husha Amru, he quotes a pasuk in Re'eh as the source for this Isur of eating chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos. Lo sochal olav chametz. Thou shall not eat on it chametz. What is on it? V'kinui olav. And this pronoun olav, shav al keves haPesach. It goes back to the keves haPesach, which is described earlier in the parsha. Sha'anu chayavim l'shochto bein arbayim yom arbasa b'nisan. The Omar, and what is the Torah saying and implying when it says lo sochal olav on the Pesach chametz me'eshi agias man shchitaso. Once the time period for Shchitas HaPesach comes about, namely Chatzos on Erev Pesach, Lo Sochal Olav Chametz. Don't eat Chametz. And this is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda in Pesachim on Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis. And the Rambam quotes Rabbi Yehuda verbatim, Ubigemara Pesachim Chav Ches Amid Beis, Minayin li ochel chametz, Misheish shos ulamala shu below taseh, shenemar lo tochal olav chametz. And this is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. And based on Rabbi Yehuda, the Rambam counts this in Taryag Mitzvos, the Isur of eating chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos, me'esh shehigia zman shchitas haPesach. Because the pasuk says, lo sochal olav chametz. And what does the olav refer to? The keves haPesach. So from the time of shchitas keves haPesach, which is Chatzos on Erev Pesach, lo sochal chametz, you're enjoined from eating chametz. If you do so, you violate an Isur Lav Doraisa, you'll get Malchus, and hence we have to count this in Taryag. The Rambam makes no reference to the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. The Ramban is going to do so in just a minute and point out that it's like unfair. The Rambam is only giving us like a small part of the picture by quoting Rabbi Yehuda and his interpretation of the pasuk. Rabbi Shimon has a different take on this pasuk. Bruce?
When it's usher to eat chametz on Pesach, is the only argument here when the Isser begins? So it's still one Isser? The question of when does it start?
Well, yes and no, because if you eat chametz on Pesach, then you chayiv karetz. We're not talking about chayiv karetz. The maximum punishment for eating chametz on Erev Pesach, if you paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, as the Rambam does, is malchus. It's not the same as eating chametz during Pesach.
So it's an extra mitzvah. In other words, it's another aver. It's a in the 613. I'm saying it's
Yeah, for sure. It's a separate, because we have a lav in the Torah, lo taseh lo tochel of chametz, and it applies in a time period where the lav of chametz does not apply. The lav of chametz, as we know it, and the Torah repeats that many times, is during Pesach itself. So now we have a lo taseh that applies to a different window of time, and the Torah prohibits it with a lav, and therefore it's counted as a separate lav in Taryag mitzvahs. That's okay, and the Ramban has no problem with the Rambam if only we would accept Rabbi Yehuda. But the problem that the Ramban is going to raise is that we don't necessarily accept Rabbi Yehuda.
And is the opposing view that it's sort of a gezerah? I mean, either it's a deraita or a gezerah to protect the deraita.
Could be. Hold off with that comment, which is an excellent comment, just for 1 minute. Look at the next piece in the Rambam. The Rambam wants to prove to us that we accept Rabbi Yehuda. And he quotes another Gemara in Pesachim, a very famous Gemara in Pesachim, at the beginning of the Masechta on Daf Daled Amud Beis. V'shama Amru, listen to the Gemara's quote, De Kule Alma, everybody agrees, mias, however, that Chametz Misheish Shosel Amala Doraisa. That's a quote from the Gemara. So from the 6th hour and on, Chametz is Doraisa. The Gemara has no compunctions about that. Kuli Alma. It's universally accepted. This is what we call in Yiddish a starke raya. This is a very strong proof that we accept that chametz is asur, da'oraisa, the Gemara is outspoken about it, on Erev Pesach. Hence, we accept Rabbi Yehuda's Shita. Hence, we have to add another lav to the lavim of the Torah. And now we open up the Ramban. The Ramban attaches his comment here to mitzvahs los aseh kuf tzadi tes, and he writes the following. He says, Ze eno ka'alocha. The Rambam is saying something that's not accepted la'alocha. Ki masha omru b'gemara psachim Chav chesam et beis minayin la'ochel chametz mishei shosel mala shu belosa shenemar lo sochel of chametz heim divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Very nice. Kol hakavod. You want to quote Rabbi Yehuda? That's fine. Except Rabbi Shimon cholek olav sham. And the Rambam is like pulling the wool over our eyes. He quotes Rabbi Yehuda as if there's no other way of looking at this pasuk. And it's crystal clear that this is a lav d'oraisa to eat chametz on Erev Pesach. What about Reb Shimon? Amalo Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon says to Reb Yehuda, "V'chiyef shalom akein." Is it possible, as you say, that there's an Isur lav to eat chametz on Erev Pesach? V'lo kvar nemar lo sochel olav chametz shivas yamim. tochel olav matzos. The Torah has a hekesh between lo sochel olav chametz, this very pasuk that you, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Rambam ben Maimon, are quoting, and the next part of the pasuk, which says Shivas Yomim Tochel Ol Matzos. B'shosh yeshno b'kum echol matzah, yeshno b'bal Tochel Olav Chametz. B'shosh eino b'kum echol matzah, eino b'bal Tochel Chametz. The Torah went out of its way to attach this pasuk of lo sochel olav chametz to Shivas Yomim Tochel Olav Matzos, to teach me that when are you enjoined from eating chametz? When you're obligated to eat matzah. 7 days of Pesach, but not Erev Pesach. And this argument of Rabbi Shimon is so convincing that halachic Rabbi Shimon. And therefore, chametz lifnei zmano, eino over all below klum. There's no violation of chametz before zmano. Chametz is only usher during the 7 days in which I'm obligated to eat matzah. So what do we do with the word olav? I mean, the Torah says lo sochal olav chametz, and the Rambam points out that olav shav al shchitas keves haPesach. What is Reb Shimon going to do with the word olav? Umilas olav shava el keves haPesach hi al achilaso. Yeah, the Rambam, you're right. The word olav does refer to the Pesach, but not to the Shchitas HaPesach, but to the Achilas HaPesach. And when is the Pesach eaten? At night, on the 15th. K'mosha Omar, as the pasuk continues, Shivas Yomim Tochal Olav Matzos. Meaning when you start with olav and the mitzvah of Achilas HaPesach kicks in, then we begin the 7-day period in which you're obligated to eat matzah, and you're enjoined from eating chametz. So again, it comes out that according to the Ramban, everybody agrees that the word olav is a reference to, an allusion to the Korban Pesach. But the question is, what part of the Korban Pesach? The shchit on Erev Pesach or the achila on Pesach itself? Umefurish b'Yushalmi shedivrei Rabbi Yehuda, l'divrei Rabbi Yehuda olav, the word olav in lo sochal olav chametz al shchitas haPesach, u'l'divrei Reb Shimon al achilas haPesach. So now the Ramban is so convinced that we accept the interpretation of the word olav referring to achilas haPesach of Reb Shimon against Rabbi Yehuda. And the proof is because the Torah itself says in this very same pasuk, Shivas Yomim Tochel Matzos. So the olav is referring to the Achilas HaPesach, and you are commanded to eat matzah for 7 days, and during that 7-day period, you're commanded, or shall we say enjoined from eating chametz, but not before the 7-day period starts. But wait a second. As we say again, kol hakavod to the Ramban, but the Rambam has an explicit Gemara. The Gemara says on Daf Daled that kuli alma mias chametz bi Erev Pesach d'oraisa. How could the Ramban stare that Gemara in the face and poo-poo it? Says the Ramban, v'toma ani al araya shalokach. I don't even understand this proof of the Rambam. Shalokach mimashe motza b'loshen nischos meduyakos. Okay, there are different girsos in this particular Gemara, but the Rambam did his research, great scholarship, and he came to the conclusion that the Ziknei Talmud wrote what's called nischos meduyakos. The Rambam, by the way, had a tremendous voluminous library. Again, it was all manuscripts. It was before the printing press by 5 centuries, whatever. And in those girsos, it says the following: the kuli alma mias chametz mishei shos l'mala doraisa. So the Rambam therefore jumped to the conclusion that it means that there's an iser Achilas Chametz D'Oraisa, according to everyone, it's the final accepted opinion on Erev Pesach from Sheishos Lamala. Says the Ramban, what are you talking about? Shezeh Eino Ela Al Askamasam. What askama, what unanimous acceptance is the Gemara referring to? Shesarfin b'tchila sheish. Not that there's an Isra Achila midday on Erev Pesach, but everybody agrees that there's a mitzvah of destroying the Chametz on Erev Pesach from Chatzos. Shehu chiyuv levaro min haTorah mi mitzvahs tashbisu si'ar mi batechem. The Gemara is not referring to lo sochal of Chametz. The Gemara is referring to tashbisu. And what does it mean? Bayom HaRishon? Bayom HaRishon means the day before Pesach. Erev Pesach, at what point in time is there a mitzvah tashbisu of bir Chametz? At Chatzos. So now the Ramban, having reinterpreted that line in the Gemara that was such a perfect, explicit proof to the Rambam, and setting it straight, the record is not Achila, but rather Biur. Doesn't the Ramban have to ask himself a question here? The Torah is commanding me to destroy my chametz, but I'm allowed to eat it? Again, here's a loaf of bread in front of you. It's afternoon on the 14th of Nisan. Are you allowed to eat it? Says the Ramban, you're allowed to eat it. Do I have to destroy it? I have to destroy it. Come on. What are you telling me to destroy it when I'm allowed to eat it? Does that make any bit of sense? Now, you may have heard of Rabbeinu Zrachia Halevi, the Baal HaMa'or. He was so disturbed by this question that he came to the conclusion that destroying chametz doesn't require that you burn the chametz, set the torch to the chametz, just eat the chametz. V'elucha bir gadol mizeh. The Baal HaMa'or says that when you eat chametz on Erev Pesach after midday, you are fulfilling the mitzvah of bir chametz. I mean, the Rishonim never accepted the Baal HaMa'or because bir chametz means destroy the chametz, doesn't mean eat the chametz. But the Ramban is in deep trouble here because the Ramban says, well, everybody agrees, and that's the text of the Gemara, that chametz is asur on Erev Pesach after Chatzos, but not that there's an isur lav u'lo sochal of chametz, because that lav doesn't kick in until the time of Achilas HaPesach at night. So what does it mean that everybody agrees that chametz is asur mid'oraisa in midday? Says the Ramban, it means bir chametz, to destroy the chametz.
They can't exist together? There can't be two separate halachot?
That the Torah is allowing me to eat the chametz, but yet I have to destroy it? Is there such
if for some way, I don't know.
This is Avi Pfeiffer speaking?
Yeah.
Okay, hi, Avi. It's not a shade. Okay.
It can't be two separate independent halachot, and they have to make sense.
I can't even imagine if I would challenge you. Give me a precedent somewhere in the world of halacha where the Torah says you're allowed to eat something and you're obligated to destroy it. There ain't no such thing. It's just A and not A at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. You can't tell me destroy something that I have license to eat it. So the Ramban has to face this problem. How could you tell me I'm allowed to eat chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos when the Ramban himself admits that you have to destroy the chametz? And it's a mitzvah d'oraisa of beer. Says the Ramban, Varai osur b'achila. I definitely concede that you're not allowed to eat chametz on Erev Pesach. We're beginning to narrow the gap between the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam had established that there's an Isur Lav that has to be added to Taryag excuse me, and joining us from eating Chametz on Erev Pesach. The Ramban agrees that the Torah prohibits eating Chametz on Erev Pesach. But, says the Ramban, you know why you're not allowed to eat Chametz on Erev Pesach? Bishum dekoi Allah b'mitzvahs hashbasa. If you have Chametz in your possession, after Chatzos, the Torah says destroy it. If you eat it, you don't destroy it. It's the opposite of the Balamot. This is what we call an Iser Aseh. We derive an Iser because to do the Iser would be undermining the Aseh. Like, for example, if one was to eat on Yom Kippur, Chas v'Shalom, he would be undermining the Aseh of the Nisav Es Nafshel Seichem. If one would eat Chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos, he would be undermining the mitzvah of Tashbisu. Because the Torah looks at that Chametz and says, destroy the Chametz. And you're eating the Chametz? Aval ein bo lav. The difference is going to be in Taryag mitzvahs. According to the Rambam, who says that there's a separate lav of lo sochal olav chametz in joining us from eating chametz from midday on the 14th of Nisan, that's going to be added to the Taryag. According to the Ramban, we already have a mitzvah of tashbisu, and that mitzvah of tashbisu is included in Taryag. We don't derive a lav over here from the mitzvah of tashbisu. Again, we're not allowed to, and we're enjoined from eating chametz because that would undermine the mitzvah of tashbisu. But in and of itself, there is no lav that prohibits me from eating chametz. If I eat chametz on Erev Pesach, according to the Rambam, I get malchus for that. I have violated the lav of lo sochel of chametz. According to Ramban, on the other hand, you can give me shmaitzin, you can beat me up because I didn't fulfill my mitzvah, my obligation of tashbisu, but I didn't violate a law. Ubeferish Amru, the Kuli Almamia, Chametz Mishay Shosalamal Doraisa, Minole. The Gemara goes on right after that line, which the Rambam quotes as his flagship, his proof. The Gemara says, how do we know? And why does everybody agree that Chametz is also after Sheish Shos midday on Erev Pesach? Omar Abaye, we learn it from the pasuk that says Tashbisu Siar Mi Batechem. So you see that there's no separate Isser of Achila of Chametz on Erev Pesach. There's just a mitzvah of Tashbisu. Mivuar says the Ramban, it's crystal clear. Shemasha Amru b'Chametz Misheish Al Somal Doraisa Eina Ela b'Mitzvahs Hashbasa. We are enjoined from eating Chametz because by virtue of the mitzvah Hashbasa, that Ach Bayom Arishon Tashbisu. You remember from your youth, when you learned the beginning of Pesach, it says Ach Chilek. You remember that? That the word Ach splits the day into two and commands you to destroy your chametz midday. Vaklal Shalocha Mizeh b'chametz kodem zmano she'eino over love below klum. There's no love. Ertza she'ein bo love. V'yein halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda. As we saw, the pasuk of Lo Sochel of Chametz is referring olav to the achila of Korban Pesach, not to the shchita of Korban Pesach. V'lo k'divrei misha nosein lav b'kiyumo bilvad. Oh, now we get to a turning point. He says that there's somebody, anonymous, faceless, he doesn't identify who he is, who claims that there is a lav that you violate on Erev Pesach, vis-a-vis Chametz, a separate lav, and that would again get us back to counting another lav in Taryag, which the Ramban is trying working overtime to avoid. What is the lav? Lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Now, lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi is quoted by the Rambam in Mitzvah Kuf Tes Vav, which is here in my edition on page Shin Chaf Tes. Let me just read this to you. HaMitzvah Kuf Tes Vav. Again, we're still in the Lavim. Hu sha'amro yisbarach lo sizbach ala chametz dam zivchi. Vinyano, what is the meaning of lo sizbach? This in Parshas Mishpatim. Till now we were in Parshas Re'eh. In Yano, shebe'ez shchitas ha-Pesach, ben arbayim, from midday on Erev Pesach, lo yeh b'rshus chametz. He's not allowed to have chametz in his possession. So somebody wanted to come along and add another lo taseh to the Taryag, that you're not allowed to possess chametz on Erev Pesach from the time of Shchitas HaPesach, which is midday. Says the Ramban, v'lo kidivrei, don't be influenced by the words of me, some anonymous person, should no say lav b'kiyumo. Kiyumo means possessing chametz. Bilvad, even though he didn't eat the chametz, he didn't get any benefit from the chametz, he just simply retained his ownership on the chametz on Erev Pesach. He's got it floating around in his house. Vidoresh, and what led such a person, an anonymous, nameless person, to come to that conclusion? Because the pasuk says, "Lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi," and that should indicate, as we saw in the Rambam, shebe'esh shchitas ha-Pesach. I'm quoting again the Rambam in Kuf Tes Vav, lo yeh b'rshus chametz. So now we're going to add another lav in the Torah. Again, we've rejected an Isra Achila on Erev Pesach because the pasuk lo sochal olav, the word olav means on the Achila of the Korban Pesach, as we saw from the Hekesh to Kumechol Matzah. But now we have another lav to add to our constellation of lav. You're not allowed to possess chametz midday. And that might give us a whole new insight into the Gemara that the Rambam quotes as a raya, as a proof text, when it says that Kuliyama mias chametz mishei shosel malado raisa, which again the Ramban interpret that to mean it's an isa derived from the mitzvah of tashbisu. But now we have a different interpretation of that Gemara in the name of some anonymous Amora or Rishon, namely that you're not allowed to own chametz on Erev Pesach. Not from the pasuk lo sochal of chametz, but from the pasuk lo sishchat es chametz al dam zivchi, which means that you're not allowed to have chametz in your possession when the time for shchitas ha-Pesach comes around. So the Ramban has to reject that sheet as well. Now, in order to appreciate how the Ramban maneuvers that lo sishchat lo sishchat, what's again the pasuk lo sishchat ha-Pesach al chametz, that doesn't present a new lav in the Torah of owning chametz at the time of the Shchitas HaPesach. Says the Ramban. Now I'm going to add a few words here. Let's read the Rambam carefully. And the Rambam in Mitzvah Kuf Tes Vav, for the third time, I'm going to read it to you. His Hiranu, the Torah warns us, meaning prohibits us. Mishchot ha-Pesach ala chametz. What does a Rambam indicate? What is the definition of this lav? I'm going to read it again. Shizharinu Mishchot ha-Pesach al chametz. What's the violation of this law? The shchitas ha-Pesach. Do you see it? And that's what I think the Ramban is referring to in the next few words when he says, Shezeh eino el l'shocheres ha-Pesach al chametz. When the Torah prohibits us from having chametz, the Isur is not the ownership of the chametz, but rather the Isur is the shchitas ha-Pesach. And I'll prove it to you, because the Rambam points out that even if you don't have any chametz in your rishus, but one of the bnei achabura, one of those who's manui together with you on the Pesach owns chametz, then the shochet violates this Isur lav. So it's not the lav of owning the chametz, it's the lav of the shchita. And the shchita is related to the entire chabura. If any single member of the chabura owns chametz, then you violate the Isur of lo sishchat, lo tizbach al chametz dam zivti. So now we come to the conclusion that according to the Ramban, we're not going to add any lavim here to the Taryag. Neither the lav of lo sochel olav chametz, because that's referring to the 7 days of Pesach, and we already have a lav that enjoins us from eating chametz during the 7 days of Pesach. There's no lav of achila on Erev Pesach, because all we have is tashbisu and a kum v'aseh to destroy the chametz, from which we derive that you're not allowed to eat the chametz, but it's not a lav. Nor do we have a lav of owning chametz on Erev Pesach, because there the lav is the shchita of the Pesach when he has chametz in his possession. Is Memela the Ramban now adds the following 6 words to close this whole discussion. Vehine gam zeh yechaser micheshben alav. Cheshben alav. Now, when I first read those words of the Ramban, I interpreted them thusly: that now that we've excluded a lav of eating chametz on Erev Pesach, a lav of owning chametz on Erev Pesach, then we're missing 2 lavim, and we're going to have to make up for them in order to achieve Taryag. But on second thought, I would like to suggest that that's not what the Ramban has in mind. I'd like to reinterpret the words of the Ramban. V'hinei gam zeh yechaser mecheshben alav. Zeh, meaning the second opinion, like the first opinion, meaning the second opinion who adds a lav of lo sishchat for owning and possessing chametz on Erev Pesach, like the first opinion, gam zeh, like the Rambam, who has a lav that prescribes eating chametz on Erev Pesach. For both of these gentlemen, yechaser micheshben alavim. Yechaser means they have to go ahead and subtract from the cheshben alavim. The Rambam is going to have to subtract 1 lav because he has a lav that he added based on Rabbi Yehuda that enjoins us from eating chametz in Erev Pesach, and the anonymous opinion here is going to have to subtract a lav from the Taryag because he added a lav of lo tizbach chametz al dam zivchi, of prohibiting ownership over chametz on Erev Pesach. And if we take that interpretation and we go back to our Ramban here in Shoresh Rishon, the Ramban is now saying Hine Arav Atzmo Zal, meaning the Rambam himself is caught up in the thorns, in the tizbochet, the maze of Taryag mitzvahs, because the Ramban says that now you, the Rambam, have added another lav. I don't have that extra lav, says the Ramban. I paskin like Reb Shimon, and the pasuk indicates like Reb Shimon. And when the Gemara says Kuliyamalo pligi chametz erev Pesach, it's talking about the Isur Achila b'toras bittul essay of tashbisu. I'm not going to add another lav. My cheshbon is clear, it's meduyak, it's precise. But you, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, have added another lav of eating chametz on Erev Pesach, lo sochel of chametz based on Rabbi Yehuda. You're in deep trouble because you, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimon, now have the obligation to look at the list of Taryag and subtract one of the lav. And that's what I think the Ramban says here in those last 6 words. V'hine gam zeh. Now, Rambam, yechaser micheshbon lav. You're going to have to find a lav that you can cross out from your list of lavim in order to maintain the number Taryag.
Rabbi,
Yes.
in every case where there's a positive mitzvah, and then we sometimes see a negative mitzvah against do this and make sure you don't do that. Is it always very clear? Because again, in this case, I'm not sure why it's again not a subcategory that one can include if 613 is sacrosanct. If that's the case, why can't I somehow work it in if I want to maintain the 613?
Yeah, you could work it in. The Ramban is not denying that at the end of the day, you could work it in. The Rambam is going to find some lav which he's going to subtract from the Taryag. But let's call a spade, says the Ramban. That's a tremendous headache. That's an undertaking. You no longer have what we call carte blanche. You no longer have laissez-faire. You no longer have like freedom of spirit. You are incarcerated in this jail. You're going to add a lav? Then go ahead and subtract the lav. Can you do it? Well, you bet your bottom dollar you can do it, and the Rambam is going to have to do it. But it's like prejudicing. Yeah, imagine I look at every single lav counted in Taryag, and I begin to question it. I've already added a lav here of enjoining me from eating chametz and Erev Pesach. Now, where do I kill a lav? I got to kill one of the lavim. It's a whole new endeavor.
Again, I'm wondering when then there's a positive mitzvah, let's say pru revu. I mean, I'm making one up. Right. Does that always mean that there's also a lav not to stay single and avoid pru? I mean,
I wouldn't call it a lav. I would call it a bittul aseh. Now, what does bittul aseh mean? Like, let's say, for example, it's the first day of Pesach, and you give me, the first day of Sukkot, and you give me a lulav. Yeah, I can say the same thing on Pesach. I take the lulav and I rip it to shreds. Did I violate an isur? Or, for example, it's the first day of Sukkot, I'm eating a meal, and I eat it outside the sukkah. Did I violate an isur? So that's called bittul aseh. And there are 3 levels. There's one level of non-fulfillment. That's a passive state. That's the lowest state. Then there's another level of actively being mevatel a mitzvah by taking the lulav in my hands and ripping it to shreds. And then there's a third level of violating an isur aseh because the essay indicates an isur. So, for example, in the case of Erev the Onan, right, the sons-in-law of Yehuda, that might be an isur aseh. When the Torah says pru revu, it could be that entails an isur not to spill the zera, because that's, again, at least in that situation where he could impregnate her. I'm not talking about hashchas zera in general, but I'm saying in that situation where in this Maisa Bia you have a mitzvah period of Arivia and you go ahead and you do the opposite, it could be that that's a violation of an isur. It's not just a bittul aseh. Or, for example, eating on Yom Kippur, it's not just a bittul aseh. Oh, I didn't reach the state of inui v'nisem, but it's an isur that's derived from an essay. Then we have the next level, which is called a lav, which is a lotas.
In all these cases, is there a nafkamina here, or is it Does it?
Yeah,
have
the
to be
nafkamina is always
Rashba?
going to be the punishment, the onesh. So when you talk about bittul asay, there's no punishment. I mean, the Gemara says kofin ala mitzvahs. The Torah is not very democratic. It beats you up until you do the mitzvah. But that's not a punishment. There is no punishment for a bittul asay. There may be a punishment for an iser asay, but again, it's not full-fledged malchus. We have even within malchus, we have various types and categories of malchus. But when you violate a law, for example, if somebody were to eat Chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos, according to the Rambam, he will get malchus. According to the Ramban, he will not get malchus. In the worst case scenario, he violated an iser asay of tashbisu by not destroying the Chametz. No punishment for that. So you and I may be saying to ourselves, you know what, this is a very theoretical machlokas, you want to call it in, count it as part of the law. Even the Ramban agrees that even though he's not willing to count it as a law in Taryag, that you're not allowed to eat chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos. The Ramban is not denying that's an Isa Doraisa. And the Gemara says it explicitly. That was the Rambam's proof text. But the Ramban, by excluding it from the Taryag mitzvahs, and preferring Rabbi Shimon's interpretation of the pasuk and rejecting Rabbi Yehuda's interpretation of the pasuk, if a person chas v'shalom eats chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos, according to the Ramban, he goes off scot-free. Whereas according to the Rambam, he's going to get 39 lashes, and that's lo na'im, to understate it. And the Gemara thinks that 39 lashes might even be worse than putting someone to death. I mean, the Gemara goes back and forth in Masechta Ksubas about that issue. But whatever it is, I don't want to get off on a tangent. Every time I say something, you try to take. No, I don't want to go that way. I'm just telling you that according to the Rambam, if you eat chametz on Erev Pesach with Hasra and Tu'edim, you will get 39 lashes. According to the Ramban, that's not so. You're guilty of violating tashbisu, but not of a law. So in a sense, now let me explain something, just to be absolutely clear. Bruce, I'm not telling you that all these issues about Taryag will determine whether you get malchus. Please don't misunderstand me. There's a bona fide machlokas about whether there's an isur lav. It manifests itself and expresses itself in whether you're going to count it in Taryag. And the Ramban is going to say, well, you now have a big headache because if you're adding a lav to Taryag, you have to subtract one down the line. But that's something else. That's in terms of the whole endeavor of coming up with Taryag. The original machlokes about whether or not you get malchus for eating chametz on Erev Pesach is a bona fide machlokes that has nothing to do with our issue of Taryag. I just want to make that absolutely clear.
The Rashbam, what does he call it if it's not a lav? What category does it fit into?
I don't remember the Rashbam. Just remind me for a second. I'm sorry.
I'm saying the one that says it's not a lav. What is it then?
The Ramban, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if we quoted the Rashbam. I don't know. In the previous year, we quoted the Rashbam.
I'm confused. Yeah. If it's not a lav, what is it then?
It's what's called an Iser Haba Machmas Essay, otherwise known as a Lav Haba Machal Essay or an Iser Assay. I never understood the difference between those two. I think they're synonymous. You can call it by one of two names. The choice is yours, whatever you prefer. It's either an Iser Assay or it's called a Lav Haba Machal Assay. I think they're both synonymous.
It's not part of the Taryag. It's a separate.
Not to be counted in Taryag, because we're going to count the essay in Taryag. And once we count the essay in Taryag, in the calculation of mitzvah asay, there's no room for the Iser Haba Machmas HaEssay to be counted as a separate law. So, for example, if I were to tell you, where do you find the Iser Achila of Yom Kippur in the Taryag? What number would it be? It's not there. It doesn't exist. I'd be fooling you. If I asked you, where is the Isur of Achila included in the Taryag, the answer would be under the Mitzvah Saseh of V'nisa. But there is no lav that prescribes Achila on Yom Kippur. It's a lav habo mechalesa. And the Ramban, in a like style, says that the Torah says destroy the chametz means you're not allowed to eat the chametz, but it's an essay and it's counted as an essay in Taryag. But according to the Rambam, eating chametz on Erev Pesach is now, in addition to tashbisu as an essay, is a separate lav derived from lo sochel of chametz, and it's got to be counted in Taryag. And hence the Ramban argues that the Rambam now has a major project that he has to dedicate his time to somehow subtract another law. Because the Rambam, what was the word you used, Bruce? Sacrosanct. According to the Rambam, Taryag is sacrosanct. You've got to come up with Taryag. This entire book that I'm holding on to, that's made up of hundreds of pages, is all based on the Rambam's commitment to the sanctity of Taryag. And by the way, you should know that, again, I didn't make a mathematical calculation, but I'm convinced, even without doing so, that most of this book that the Rambam wrote is dedicated not to counting the mitzvahs and enumerating them, but rather to tell you which pasuk in the Torah is a valid candidate for Taryag. And the Rambam is going to give you 14 different rules. 14 different rules as to whether or not a specific pasuk and a mandate in the Torah qualifies to be counted on the Taryag. 14 different rules. The first rule is don't count mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. Those are rabbinic. They were not given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai. And the Taryag have to have been given to Moshe Rabbeinu at Har Sinai and have the status of a Doraisa. And the Ramban questions the entire sanctity of Taryag. Why? Because Rav Simlai has a drasha, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, etc., with all the gematria that we discussed. No. That's Rav Simlai's own personal opinion. How did he arrive at that conclusion? Not based on some halacha l'Moshe Sinai, not based on his interpretation of a pasuk. He counted the mitzvahs, and guess what number he arrived at? 613. Could he arrive at a different number? Absolutely. But in his calculation, it came to 613. So Rav Simlai says, now I'm going to find a pasuk. I'll find it a smachta. How do you say a smachta in English? I don't even know the English translation of it.
Well, it's a hook.
A hook?
Find
Okay.
a pasuk to hook it on.
All right. I was wondering if in the technical
sword.
language of, now we have Art Scroll and all these books that translate, or I don't know if did Steinsaltz translate into English? I don't remember. I think he did.
Yeah.
So in all this literature, I wonder if there's a, like a technical translation of the word asmachta into English. But basically call it a hook. Call it a simon ledavar, call it a memory device, whatever you want to call it.
There's also an asmachta ba'alma that's even less. I mean, it's merely
It's an asmachta b'alma. That's the Ramban's argument. I calculated the mitzvahs, says the Ramban, I came up with a different calculation. It doesn't equal 613. And all these Tanoim, which I want to conclude next week, I don't know what time it is now. Oh, we have to stop soon. But all these Tanoim are going to come up with different calculations of the mitzvahs. They have to. Because this Tana is going to say, well, Liolam Be'em Tavodu is a mitzvah. And the other Tana is going to say it's only Rishus. And do I have to redeem my field, that's Mukefes Choma, or not? And do I have an Isur Chametz on Erev Pesach after Chatzos or not? And I'm going to come up with a totally different calculation. The Ramban is going to allow freedom of expression, freedom to be free from the shackles of Taryag.
This isn't the same thing, but it's very similar to what must a Jew believe in to be Jewish? And there's different lists.
Well, wait a second. Let me say this to you, Bruce. There are 13 principles. If you want to come up with a different number, bavakasha. Who says, did somebody come down from the heavens and reveal to you that the total number of the tenets of the faith, the author of Yigdal, right, is 13?
No.
The Rambam says so. But what did the Rambam have the number 13 as halacha Moshe Sinai? The Rambam went through all of the Torah, especially the last parak of Sanhedrin, and he came to the conclusion that there are 13 principles of the faith. And the Gemara says if you deny X, you're a kofar. You deny Y, ein lo chelik olam haba, etc., etc., etc. So the Rambam came up with the number 13. And if you come up with a different number, for example, the Sefer Ikrim, he came up with the number 3. He took the 13 and collapsed and reduced them to 3. And the Gemara at the end of Makkah says there's only one, Emunah. Whatever it is, there's no Gzeirus HaKosov here that you have to maintain the sanctity, as you called it, of the number 13 principles of the faith. And the Ramban, again, we didn't get to the punchline of the Ramban. What's he going to do at the end with all these different sources and Rishonim and liturgists that we mentioned before that all maintain, 613. But the Ramban is leading us to the conclusion that let's learn the Torah in an honest to goodness way, take every pasuk in and of itself. And if it ends up at 613, Matov, we'll make a little dance, we'll have a Seudas Ibra Chodesh, because it came to 613. And if it didn't come to 613, Nishkeferlach, it's okay, we'll survive it. That seems to be the pattern and the road that the Ramban is taking us down. And hopefully, we'll see at the end of this road, what is the Ramban going to do with all those who seem to wave the flag of 613? Take the Bahag, for example, who counted 7 mitzvahs aseh d'Rabbanan, rabbinic mitzvahs, as part of Taryag. What did he do? He had to subtract another 7, according to the Rambam Shita. So what is the Ramban at the end of the day? This is a cliffhanger for today. What is he going to do with all these Rishonim and Achronim and all the liturgists and all the poems and all the poets and everybody else who said 613? And the Ramban is going to show you Gemara after Gemara, one after the other, that mentions the number 613. How do we reconcile this whole thing? Okay, then with that, I leave you for today. I have a long walk, one flight of steps to my next year. And, everyone should have a great day. And it should be an Eli for my mother-in-law, whose Shloshim is today. And she should have an Aliyas Neshama.